Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Let's get rolling. I don't know if you've noticed this. It's kind of hard to see with only the very top part of my body. But in the last 3 weeks, for reasons that are not entirely clear to me, I have lost 30 pounds. I went from 181 to where I am right now because I was just at the physician's office today checking on my concussion. 151. How? I have no idea. Part of it, I think, is that I'm eating better. I've been going back to eating Nutrisystem and not eating out as much. And when I do eat out, I get salads. So that may be a part of it. But there's something else going on um, that I don't really understand. Um, but I think mostly it's my diet, my attitude, my desire to fight. In these times, when the world around us is so visibly falling apart in distress, there is nothing better that any of us can do right now, in my opinion, than to fight. If I don't do it, who will? I've given up on the idea of always trying to be polite, whatever polite means. I think polite is a word that is often misused. Is it polite if I walk by and I see somebody getting beaten up and I simply walk by? Is that polite? Is it polite if I watch something online, a conversation online, and I see somebody being attacked because of their race, their gender, their ethnicity? Is that polite? Or is it polite if I stand up to the scoundrel and say something and maybe even do something, although what I can do honestly as a now 69-year-old man as of yesterday is rather limited with osteoporosis on top of that. Can't do that much, but I can do some. I was just on the phone with a longtime friend of mine, my oldest friend, and I won't mention his name, obviously, but he's feeling down and out, really, really down and out. And I suggested to him that perhaps the major reason why he feels that way, is because he is experiencing all of the troubles of the world upon his shoulders, which he does. He's a very sensitive guy. And he realizes that he can't do anything about them. He's not entirely in very good physical shape, can't walk around very well anymore, can't drive anymore. So he is not really in any condition to stand up and fight himself directly. I suggested to him, well, you can always fight on email, you can fight online, even if you can't fight directly. I fight like I fought when I was in the hospital against those physicians and how they were treating me. I fought the way that they were being unjust to me. Like the cardiologist who said, if you stay, if you stay in the medical center, we will give you 2 more of your meds. Well, implication. They could have given me 2 more of my meds, but they didn't. Why? beats me, beats me. Torture, sadism, Schadenfreude, I don't know, something really evil lurking in the hearts of those people, as I see all the time in this part of the country, which has been so corrupted by the drug cartels, with people being bought out by them. And in most cases, the corruption here is not, I think, necessarily connected directly to the cartels, but the drug cartels have created a kind of culture of corruption in this area in Deep South Texas, which runs across the border from the Rio Grande Valley here, which is called Deep South Texas, to the Rio Grande Valley on the Mexican side, right across the Rio Grande River. So even if the corruption here is not always directly a result of the cartels, if that culture exists, if that's what people see, if that's what people observe people doing, behaving corruptly, and maybe at times being successful, I've noticed here that the majority of people don't do anything when they see corruption. Like when I was sexually assaulted by that male nurse last year or 2 years ago, whenever it was, I reported it. Then I began to think, there is no way that I could have been this guy's first victim. When, as he was inserting the catheter, he said, "So, how does it feel like having your penis touched by a man?" Well, I didn't respond to him. I didn't know what he might do to me if I did respond to him. I was laying on that hospital bed. But I reported him right afterwards, and I got a call saying he was suspended. Now, in this area, it takes a lot more than that to be fired. This is so corrupt. This is the center of medical corruption in the United States. Not only medical, political, economic, business, everything. This is the but for my purposes right now, this is the center of medical corruption in the United States. This area has the second highest medical costs in the country. First is Miami, Florida. Miami, Florida? This is one of the three poorest regions of the United States. The Rio Grande Valley, where I am, or Deep South Texas. The Mississippi Delta, which is the area in Mississippi that's directly south of Memphis and directly north of Natchez, Mississippi. And Southern Appalachia. And I have lived in 2 out of 3 of those areas. Spent 4 years living in Southern Appalachia. I saw that kind of poverty firsthand. Been here now for 2.5 years. Never lived in Mississippi Delta, but I did live in Mississippi for 4 years working on my Ph.D. And I visited the Delta. I saw what it was like. I saw the kind of horrendous poverty which exists in that part of the United States. The United States may not have a high rate of starvation, and it does not, but it does have a high rate of malnutrition. That it does. And so I've concluded that the best thing for me to do is what my hat says, Antifa. To be Antifa. The United States is not ready for a revolution, meaning an actual revolution to overturn capitalism in the way people think of a revolution literally. I think those will start in the third world, maybe the fourth world, or maybe places that are both third and fourth world, like Gaza. I don't know. Not here. Revolutions don't generally begin in oppressor nations because people in those oppressor nations are, compared to the rest of the world, fat and happy. They are doing well. They have nothing to complain about. They do not want the world to change. It is people who are living in lands of the oppressed who want those conditions to change. So, for that reason, I'm not overly optimistic that there will be revolutions here in the first world right now. In other words, I am not a first worldist communist. I gave up on that a while ago, and I will never go back. First worldism has failed over and over again to deliver on its promise. Even when it has been successful, as in the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China, after a time it failed. First, Nixon visited Mao and offered him the world. He offered him a place, a seat on the United Nations. He offered to recognize mainland China in place of what we now call Taiwan, what used to be called the Republic of China in the West. He offered to give mainland China a lot of financial incentives, and believe me, they needed it. And now China has the second largest economy in the world, but it is no longer communist. It is no longer Maoist. Mao sold China out. Now, can I say that I blame him? Yes and no. I mean, he wanted the best for his people. Nixon was offering him, I guess, what he thought might be the best. Mao was not a prophet. He had no way of knowing how things would turn out, but things would turn out in the way they did. But still, I think it was, in retrospect anyway, a mistake for Mao to allow President Richard Nixon to enter into mainland China. He should never have met with Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon got his nickname Tricky Dick for a reason. That was certainly a tricky thing that Nixon did, and he won. Decades later, the Soviet Union, Gorbachev in charge now. Reagan despised communism. He even despised communism where it wasn't communism, like in Nicaragua, but he thought it was. He thought Nicaragua was communist. It wasn't, but he didn't care because to him it was communist. So he supported the Contras and did some rather nasty things, some illegal activities which he was never held account for in order to support the Contras. I won't go into those right now because that's off the subject and they're controversial. But there's a lot of evidence to support them, including people who were actually involved in those activities who came forward and confessed, fully expecting that they would be arrested. They were never arrested. So, what did Reagan do? He bankrupted the Soviet Union. He bankrupted the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics to the point where, well, the Berlin Wall came down gradually. But in addition to that, the Soviet Union itself collapsed into all of these different republics. The reason why the war is being fought right now between Russia and Ukraine and the United States, really, is because of what Ronald Reagan did in bringing down the Soviet Union. So we can't go back in time. We can't fix what happened back then. And even if I were living back in the times of, well, I was living back in those times, but I was kind of young to do anything about it. Even if I were living at the time that 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 Nixon was doing what he did, and I was only an undergraduate in college at that time, so there really wasn't much I can do. Even if I were living at the time when Reagan was doing what he did, and by then I was a professor of sociology already, what could I do as a single, isolated person? I could not by myself ferment a revolution, but Antifa, Antifa. I could always stand up for the rights of those who were treated unjustly. That is what I did in the hospital. And indeed, that is what I pledged to do for the rest of my life. A friend of mine, I'll just mention her first name, Nwandi, wonderful person. I've known her now for a few years. She's about 20 years younger than I am, which makes her still pretty old, I guess, but she's 20 years younger than me. She said to me that I need to devote myself to fighting corruption in the Rio Grande Valley, where I live. That was her thought. And I have enormous respect for her. And so it's about time that I really begin taking that seriously. It's about time that I stop feeling bad for treating people who are perpetrators of injustice badly, as I did when I was in the hospital last week. I yelled at some of them. By the time I left, every single person on the second floor of that medical center looked the other way as I went by. But by then, I realized I was successful. I had accomplished something. I was finally being anti-fat. Finally being anti-fat. So to me, Maoism-Third Worldism in the West, in the United States, in Western Europe, in Australia, New Zealand, places like that, in places that are not ready for an actual revolution to overturn capitalism or the capitalist world system. And I don't think that will be possible for a long time, possibly. At least we can become anti-fat. I'm not saying you need to wear this cap or t-shirts that say anti-fat on them. I do a lot when I walk around outside. When I was out today, I was wearing this cap. When I was eating out today, having a salad, I was wearing this cap at Schlossky's. You don't have to wear the cap, but that does not mean that you can't be anti-fat. The anti-fat movement itself is basically dead. There is no more anti-fat movement. It died about 4 years ago, even though Trump doesn't seem to realize that. It is really hard keeping social movements alive. And in the US especially, it is hard keeping movements on the left alive. They tend to have a precise beginning and a precise end. And so it has been with anti-fat. But we don't need a social movement per se. We need courageous individuals who are willing themselves to hell with the world, who are willing themselves to be anti-fat, to fight corruption wherever it is they live. And to me, that is practicing one of the major principles of being a Maoist third worldist. It is challenging authority, corrupt authority where we see it, recognizing that there is not just one empire, the American empire or the US empire. There are other empires, the Chinese empire, the Saudi empire, etc. But the empire, meaning the most powerful empire, is the US empire. No other empire even comes close. And there are others. There are others, but not like the US, not like the empire under the dominion of the US, and I guess under the dominion of the Zionist entity as well. We are the most powerful empire in the world right now, perhaps the most powerful empire in the history of the world. In recorded history, I don't know of any other empire that was quite to our level. And so if you live here, whether in the US or any other country that is under the domination of the United States, Canada, Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and so on, then you also, in my opinion, have the right to fight the corruption, to fight the authoritarianism that exists wherever you are. So I remember an old license plate bumper sticker said, think globally, act locally. I like that bumper sticker. It's true. By thinking globally, I am thinking as a Maoist third worldist. I am recognizing that revolutions will likely begin not where I am, but in the third world and in the fourth world, in the indigenous world. But by acting locally, I realize where in the world I am, precisely in deep South Texas, even more precisely in Mission, Texas, even more precisely just off Bryan Road, which is one of the major roads here in Bryan, Texas. And I know that beginning where I am right now, but I can make a difference, or at least I can try to make a difference. To me, being Antifa is an essential ingredient of being a Maoist third worldist in the West right now. We are Bund. We are Bund. We are Bund. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.